the international support towards achieving net zero emission based on the infrastructure export strategy. Now, why in Japan are we criticized for supporting export of the coal-fired power plants? Now, first of all, climate change has now become a crisis, and we need to suppress the elevation of the global temperature to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. Otherwise, the future of our children will be threatened. As was mentioned earlier, there is a growing concern about the critical situation of the climate change. And in order to suppress the increase to 1.5 or 2 degrees, we need to restrict our carbon budget. And based on this, even with the most efficient coal-fired power generation is still not sufficient. Now, within the restricted carbon budget, we will need to make our ends meet. In order for us to achieve a smooth decarbonization, we need to focus on the areas where the difficulty level is very high, where there is no alternatives as of now. We need to allocate our carbon budget in those areas. Now, the field of power generation is, as has already been mentioned, an area where we already have many new renewable energies that are not expensive. Either they're available or we are very close to have those alternatives. Now, once coal-fired power plant is built for a long time, there will be locked-in fixed power source with high emission of gas, and that is the reason why the efforts undertaken by the Japanese government have been criticized. Now, scientific basis of what I have explained to you now is on the slide. Please look at the slide on the left. This is included in IPCC, the AR5 report 5 scenario for 2 degrees Celsius. And this is the emission from the power generation sectors around the world. The red box represents the generation. And by 2070 or 2080, the net zero should be achieved, but we need, for power generation, they need to move the objective up by to 2050. Currently, there are coal-fired power plants in plan, and even with the highest critical pressure case, they will only reach the blue line. So the amount of power emission will exceed the goal. So there's no consistency with the plan. Now, if the goal is to achieve the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, there will be further limitations. And the IPCC 1.5 degrees special report say that when CCS is used, with natural gas, it's 8 to less than 10%. With the coal, it'll be 0%, close to down to 0%. The reliability level is high, therefore, even with CCS, the roles that the coal can play will be limited. And similar views have been presented by the 2050 net zero scenario issued by IEA this year. And a similar view has been presented. In principle, the IPCC's what they say is the same as IPCC. The renewable energy will play the most important role in energy mix, and the coal without a CCUS would account for about 6%. And it is in a short period of 10%, this is the case. And they are very careful in expressing their views about the coal-fired generation with CCUS. Now, as was mentioned earlier, in Japan, we have the new strategy for infrastructure systems export. And let me explain to you briefly the outline. of the strategy. There are several, but as a basic policy, the basic stance is to promote behavioral changes and commitment of partner countries through engagement and proposal. Active dialogue and involvement will be the way to promote behavioral changes of other countries. So involvement is considered important in this approach. More specifically, for example, there are various options that can be presented, or as mentioned earlier, there are long-term strategies to be supported by Japan for other countries. Those are the specific approaches that we'll take. And along with the approach, in principle, the new coal power projects will be depending on the other countries' conditions. When we are not familiar with the conditions of the partnering countries, the government will not offer official support. So in principle, the coal power, there will be no support for a coal power generation officially by the government. However, there are several exceptions that are being stated clearly in the strategy. That is, in the past, we had the fifth energy plan, and there are 4 conditions for the coal power generation. And there are several conditions. Originally, there are 4 under the 5th Strategic Energy Plan. One is that it will be limited to countries where coal have to be chosen as an energy source because of energy security or economical reasons. And in the new strategy, we have a new word added to this, for the time being. So this is a time-limited option now under the new strategy. The second condition is that the highly efficient coal thermal power generation must be requested by the partner country. And in the new strategy, it says that even with a request, if it is acceptable, if it is considered as a part of its transition towards decarbonization, and when Japan does give support, the partner countries will be able to take steps towards decarbonization and behavioral changes. So these are the criteria. The ultimate goal is clearly the decarbonization, and based on this, behavioral changes will be required. Those are the conditions added, and the conditions have become much more strict. The third condition is that we will follow OECD rules. And it says that in the new strategy, we said there's no change. We will take into OECD consideration. And here's the OECD rule. And OECD countries will have the OECD export credit arrangement. Here is a common rule. I will not get into the details, but depending on the scope of the plan, what would be the scope of the coal business that can be supported. The decision was made in 2015, introduced in 2017, and basically it is not consistent with the Paris Agreement. And actually, revision of this arrangement has already started. And for the phased reduction of official support for coal-fired power plant, we will make the conditions more strict. The plan was to revise this in June this year. However, because of COVID-19, there's been some delay in the revision process. Another related aspect is that the the OECD rules applies only to a part of the support by the government. And in the new strategy, we cover not just export financing, but investment financing and guarantees. So these are some of the differences we see. Now, getting back to the conditions, the last condition is that under the fifth strategic energy plan, the previous plan, the plans had to be the most advanced technology, but now we have specific numbers included in the requirements. So, as I have said, we now have the outline of the new strategy, and we have added new words such as for the time being or in principle. Compared to the previous energy plan, the hurdles have become much higher. And that's how we see the plan. However, if you just read this, it is as if it is saying only we will do what we can do. However, if you follow the activities of the stakeholders, it seems that it will be very difficult to provide supports to overseas projects. Now, JBIC's governor said that after the requirements become much more strict, he said that effectively there will be no new loans for overseas coal power projects in a media meeting. Also, the banks, major banks and trading companies say that in principle they will not handle any more new overseas coal power projects. So perhaps you think that we are too optimistic in Japan, but in the future in Japan, support for new overseas coal power projects is not likely to happen, is my personal impression. However, there are several concerns that have been voiced. One is that the electricity demand in developing countries are growing. What do you do about this? Do you just leave it as is? This was one of the topics mentioned earlier. And even if Japan withdraws its support, it may only be replaced by the exports of other coal power companies. Now, what should we do in the future? I have 2 points that I'd like to share with you. One is that involvement, engagement being considered important under the new strategy. It's been mentioned several times in the past, but supporting the formulating plans for decarbonized society for other countries and support the formulations of policies and the regulations. And by doing so, we will help promote decarbonization efforts by other countries. That's what we need to do. And there needs to be power generation plans that are consistent with long-term plans, renewable energies, and other decarbonization activities should increase predictabilities in other countries. And by collaborating with partner countries, we can prevent the third countries from exporting their coal power projects to those countries. Another point I'd like to mention is the importance of multilateral approaches. OECD rules, I talked about this, but the scope it covers is limited, and parties to OECD is limited. In the future, we'll need to expand this further, and this is where we need to put our focuses in. And China is a country that we cannot disregard in the future. They have One Belt, One Road, and various coal power projects are ongoing, and the President-elect, Mr. Biden, considers this very important. Achieving greenification of Belt, One Road is considered very important. The Europe, United States, and Japan will have to collaborate in approaching China on this aspect. So, based on what I have just said, you will hear about the report from the researchers and the business people involved in this area. I talked about the importance of supporting long-term plan. Mr. Matsui will talk about this. The international support by Germany. We will from Mr. Kern from KfW Group. We also have to think about private businesses perspective. Mr. Miyabe from Renova will share that with us. And the perspective of the developing nations, we will hear from Mr. Fabi Tumiwa from Indonesia. That's all from me.